Okay.
That's accurate.
Okay, we're actually going real live.
Is this real life?
No, I can post our thing. Fishing in the deluge. Deluge. That is a cool picture.
Oh, in the book?
Yeah, of the...
I haven't looked. I was audibling this thing at work.
Nice. It's Luke on the...
Oh, that's how those four-winged birds are supposed to look. Okay.
Show it to me. Can you show me the picture?
Yeah, there you go.
Nice.
Pretty cool, yeah.
When they were describing that kilometer-long pole,
Mm-hmm.
I was like,
Yeah.
that math doesn't add up. Like
That's Star Wars
kilometer
math.
is so much. Like, I mean, the idea of a stick that size, that long, is like crazy.
Yeah.
Right.
Also, that's what she said.
Well, nice. It is a legend after all.
Yeah.
Well done. We haven't had one on the show in a while.
I'm tagging you in this thing, so I believe.
Are we live? You got to warn me we're live.
We're live, but we're like as you know, we're in the like 2 minutes when you go live when no one's there yet. I say as 4 people jump on, but it was 0 and now it was 4. That's funny.
Hi, Mom.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, Mrs. Carpenter.
If Mom knew what Twitch was, nah. I'd be like,
Hey,
time to shut it down.
She probably knows what Facebook is, and she probably clicked the link that you posted.
Oh, my mom made a Podbean account back when we first started because she was like, I wonder what Mike and Jesse are posting on the Facebooks about.
The Facebooks. This is my favorite. I'm going to get cozy here.
Welcome.
Is this the cozy place?
I have some opinions about this book, by the way.
Have you read all 3 of these stories so far?
No, I just read the one we're talking about, actually.
Okay. I mean,
This one is the least ridiculous of the 3 so far.
Really?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so.
The first one, it calls the Falcon the Century Turkey.
Well, the first one was amazing.
By default, it's the most ridiculous.
The second one was not ridiculous at all. I thought the second one was very tempered. That was my second one's my favorite so far. I'm sure the first one's Mike's favorite so far.
No, I think the second one was probably. I don't know.
The second one. Is
this
the
one was
most
good too,
for sure. This one was good, yeah.
You know, the more we do this show, the less I know who Luke is. So I don't know if I can say what is the most Luke.
That's the whole reason we're doing this, right?
Well, I mean, you know, the interesting thing about it is, like, you have a character who is in so much content that, like, you can't possibly fit. You know, it's like the experience you had in the original movies is so exceptional that, like, for more notable things to happen to this one person is seemingly impossible, right?
Yeah.
But, like, if you keep writing about a character, like, part of the problem is that, like, characters in media have, good characters at least, have arcs, right, where they grow and they change.
Right.
But, like, there's only so much of that you can do, especially with, like, pre or during the movie stuff, because it's like he has to end up at a certain spot. So, like, if you write a book that's set before the movies, now if his character changes to the point where he's like the movies, you literally can't have anything else change his character between that moment and the movie.
And that's sort of what we're running into with the comics run that's between A New Hope and Empire.
Yeah.
Like, we think they're starting to do too much of that.
Zach, you've read some of those, right? The Marvel stuff?
Yeah, I read probably the first 25 issues of the Star Wars mainline.
We've read some of the
And
Vader.
Yeah, we're just
I
a
read the
little
whole
bit past
Vader.
that.
Yeah, we're past that now,
Yeah.
but that's
Well, that was one of, I liked the comics, but that was one of the things I didn't like about the Star Wars mainline. It's like having Luke and Vader interact so much
Exactly.
actually takes away from when they interact in the movies.
Yep.
Because it's like, well, this is like the 18th time you've run into each other and no one's dying, or it's like, anyways.
It becomes Star Wars Rebels.
Yeah.
ooh, hot take.
Which is not shots fired at Rebels. It was fine. It's a different type of thing.
It really is.
Well, I mean, I'm glad that Rebels ended in 4 seasons. I love Rebels.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
four was good.
It's that same reality of like, if you do too much in one space, it just starts losing its teeth.
Yeah. No, you're right.
Are you watching Resistance, Zach?
I haven't even started it.
So I watched like the first 8, then kind of got bored and stopped. But then I watched the 2-part season finale,
Uh-huh.
and there's I like a lot about the show. I really like the style and everything. I felt like it just suffered a little bit too much like Rebels filler episodes, but you can go straight to the last 2 episodes and pretty much not be all that confused. You watch the pilot and then the season finale, you know the main characters, and I mean, it's not a spoiler to say they had it all over Star Wars media that the season finale lines up with The Force Awakens.
Yeah.
So it was neat. I didn't know if we would ever actually catch up to the movies with the show, so I may stick with it. I don't know if I'll go back and watch episodes 9 through 20 that I skipped, but
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like I felt similar to Rebels, in at least for the first season, where it was fine, but like it wasn't necessary. And then I really loved the second season, but then it was slowly becoming the Ahsoka Vader show. So then by the time we got to 3rd season, it's like, well, you took away Ahsoka Vader line, and I kind of care about the Rebels crew a little bit, but not nearly as much as I should by season 3.
Yeah.
But anyway, I thought Rebels was good. We're not here to talk about that. That's a whole different podcast.
not today. Not today, Satan.
All right. Well, I'm about to cue us. We're about to start here, and I'll give you the old point, Mike. So, 3, 2, 1.
I'll stop doing it when you stop laughing. Welcome to the Canon Cantina, a Star Wars show where we try to answer the question, who is Luke Skywalker, before the release of Star Wars Episode 9. How you doing, everybody? My name is Mike. I am broadcasting from Salt Lake Base. Spring is upon us here, even though it did snow over the weekend, perhaps to the surprise of the people joining me in the Canon Cantina today. As always, I am joined by my co-host and Star Wars best friend, Jesse. What's up, man?
Man, I'm ready, Mike. I'm ready to talk about our discussion today. I'm ready about our special guest today, and that is Zach. And I'm also ready to talk celebration today. There's a lot to do, and that leads me right into introducing Zach from Team Covenant, joining us again on the show, but this time on the stream. It's very exciting.
That's right. I'm very happy to be here. Always glad to talk about Star Wars. And we're kind of on the eve here of Star Wars Celebration, which I'm also very much looking forward to. We all experienced, all 3 of us here, our very first celebration together. So
It's true.
looking forward to some more good times. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah.
It was like, serendipity that first time in 2015 when I was like March, and I was like, maybe I'll see if I can get a ticket and see if Jesse wants to go with me. And then we all ended up meeting up there, and we just kind of got lucky this year too, that we're like, hey, let's submit an application for the podcast stage. What's the worst that could happen? Well, then they accepted it, and now we have to do something live on the podcast stage, but we all get to go back to celebration again.
But serendipitous
Yeah,
is
now
good.
we have to figure out everything.
Yeah, we got to figure out a lot, but man, just think about that as like an inception point to now, how much has happened since then. And Mike basically on his deathbed having his corpse reviver cocktail that was Star Wars Celebration and The Force Awakens, bringing him back into the Star Wars folds.
I wondered where that was going. I'm with you though. Yeah,
I mean, Mike, that was even pre X-wing Mike. So there's a lot of.
Yeah,
I mean, this is wow. So. Mike came back. That was the brought him full back into the Star Wars obsession. So he was kind of fading away. We talked about that on the show a couple times. We also talked about on another podcast called Followers of the Force, where Mike and I went pretty in depth into our Star Wars stories, and it was pretty interesting to hear Mike's like story then, and then coming back full force. And yeah, now we're doing the show live at Celebration, so it's. Things have escalated.
I might hesitate to call that origin story interesting, but what we're now doing is definitely interesting. So we are back in canon stories, and those of you that have been following along, there's not just a whole lot compared to Legends novels of canon material about Luke. Right. We're taking a break from the Marvel comics to talk about another chapter for those of you watching in the Legends of Luke Skywalker book today, the third chapter, Fishing in the Deluge, which is quite interesting.
That's right. So just to refresh you guys' memory, if anyone's remember our previous episodes on the Legends of Luke Skywalker, or this is your first, this is a story that's a collection of multiple short stories, and it's written by Ken Liu, who is a prominent short story author, and it's really interesting they hired him to do this because he's never done Star Wars before, but since he's such a good, concise short story author, I think they picked him up for that reason. And this was part of the October-November 2017 Journey to the Last Jedi book series. And, as we know, this is one of the only canonical book sources we have of Luke Skywalker. I say book, I don't mean comic or video game or something at the moment, but just book. It's one of the only few book sources we have of canon Luke.
Well, and it's particularly interesting because I hadn't really even looked at this book until I found out I was going to be coming to talk about it here on the podcast. But it's obviously, for those unfamiliar, it's written from the point of view of other characters, and very much it's called the Legends of Luke Skywalker. So there's question marks surrounding, the accuracy and how much is basically. The bias of the perspective that's being given in terms of what they remember and how they remember it. So we do have very little about Luke, and what we do have is seemingly from other characters. Unlike Legends, which we had a whole bunch of point of view inside his head. What's he thinking? What's he doing? How is he changing? Which is a whole new space. And I feel like pretty much I still get the sense everything I'm reading, and we'll get into this more, I'm sure, when we actually start talking about the chapter itself. But it seems like they're keeping a very tight lid or tight leash on what they're allowing authors to basically add to canon. Mm-hmm. The thing, I recently read the Queen's Shadow. I don't know if either of you guys have read that yet.
Not yet, no.
I'm almost done. Yeah.
The cover is immaculate.
Yeah.
Like, it's one of the best covers I've ever seen.
Did you know it has
seen that, and I'll agree.
You know it has a second cover in the UK that's just as good, but completely different? Yeah.
I did not know that.
The flip-flop of it?
That was funny.
That's funny.
Literally, just... So, anyways, I think that's a really good case of... It was a well-written book that I enjoyed the character development that was happening, but nothing was happening in the plot of the book, in my opinion. Which is, I don't want to derail the whole conversation off this direction.
No, I'm ready. Let's go.
That's what we have here, Zach.
So, yeah, I've read a fair amount of the new books, and there's good moments in a lot of them, and there's a lot of stuff going on, like character development and stuff is happening. They're expanding the universe and whatnot. But a lot of times I feel like there's this restriction on the plot and how the plot interweaves with the rest of the universe and the impacts. I just remember reading the books as a kid, right? And when the Yuuzhan Vong 20-plus book series was happening, it was serious stuff was happening, right? The Republic was faltering, and they were kicking the Chancellor out, and people were dying.
A lot of plot.
And the Jedi Order was... plot was happening.
Yeah.
But I read the... I don't want to spoil it for people that haven't read it, but Queen's Shadow, and it's I do have a way greater appreciation now of Padme and her handmaidens, and even the politics of the the Republic. But at the same time, it's like when I step back and ask, like, well, what happened in the plot of this book? It's like, well, and I don't want to spoil it. I don't know. It's pretty recent, so I feel like it's a little early to spoil it. But like, not much is the answer.
Yeah.
Like, there aren't serious stakes. Nothing about the universe really dramatically changes. It's almost all character development, which is, if I had to choose plot or character development, I'd probably choose character development. But at the same time, like, it just feels like they're unwilling to commit to anything yet. And that, I understand, especially because, like, once they lock something in about Luke, as an example, you can't change that backstory for episode 9.
Yeah. Well, and to on that, I don't know if you guys saw it, but one of the big criticisms of the Aftermath trilogy, the first new canon novels that we got, was that it had all these new characters but didn't really do anything with Luke or whatever. And Chuck Wendig, who is not afraid to speak his mind on about Star Wars these days, I forget the exact wording, but he essentially said, yeah, I wrote stuff about Luke in the first Aftermath that I had to cut out because of this policy of, well, this is coming out before the movies, so we can't have it committed to paper, just depending on, what direction we decide to take 7, 8, and 9 in.
Sure. And I get that. But it's almost like I would rather them have said, hey, anything around the original movies or the prequels or the episode 7, 8, 9 or any of those characters is just off limits.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're going to write books and they're going to be about other stuff. Because it feels like there's only so many of these books I'm going to buy and read before I just stop. Because it's not that they're bad, and but it's just like, I remember reading all the books, and I'm obviously not a kid anymore, so I might be biased. But I remember as a kid, reading all these books, and it was like, I couldn't wait to read the next one, and I couldn't wait for the next one to come out. And even if I didn't like the general story, it's like I at least knew big things were happening. So I don't know. It's a weird spot, and I think the Legend of Luke Skywalker is cool, particularly for you guys' podcast, because you're trying to get in the analyze Luke as a character standpoint. But it's also just for you guys to be taking on that challenge is very difficult, because it's like they're giving you such little information to work with.
Right.
I have a feeling that after episode 9, we'll see them sort of ease up on that. Once we've, seen how, quote, the Skywalker saga concludes, then we'll see lots more books. And frequent listeners of the show know I can't let an opportunity like this go. While we were talking about Chuck Wendig, Disney, you rehired James Gunn to direct Guardians of the Galaxy 3, rehired Chuck Wendig to write some more Star Wars comics for you. You fired him for about the same reason. Well, maybe not quite the same. James Gunn's was a little more extreme, but let's go ahead and bring Chuck Wendig back, because he was writing some great stuff. I know that a lot of people didn't like the first Aftermath book, but the second and third ones I think were really great, and overall the trilogy as a whole is really good.
Truthfully, that trilogy is some of my favorite of the new canon. So after discussions Zach just had, it made the most interesting decisions and did the most interesting things. But yeah, I think a lot of the books have just been kind of character books, Zach, that were kind of more fan servicey in a way, and in positive ways. Like in the Padme book, we learn all about her handmaidens, you know what I mean? And we learned more about Panaka and things like that we didn't know anything about. But it's like, at the same time, you're right. It'd be really nice to see plot, because there is several years between episode 1 and 2. Several years,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, and I even felt, again, this episode's not about that book, so I don't want to dive too deeply there. But I assume we've gotten to the part where they go to Alderaan.
Yeah.
He's covering his spoilers. You're good, Mike. The point is, when they go there, I won't say where. It was just kind of strange, because I just didn't feel like anything happened.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah,
right? It was like I expected there to be like. I'll stop talking about it, Mike. I don't want to ruin it. Are you going to read
it? Yes, I do want to.
Yeah.
It'll just be after Celebration. Well, let's steer this back towards the Legends of Luke Skywalker, specifically Chapter 3, Fishing in the Deluge. So for those of you who have not read any of this book, like Zach said a few minutes ago, this is essentially tall tales of Luke Skywalker, as told by other randos throughout the galaxy. But our specific setting is it's the crew of the Wayward Current, a ship that's actually traveling to Canto Bight.
That's right.
It's the that delivers the Fathiers that we see in Episode 8 to the racetrack at Canto Bight. And this is the third chapter that a stowaway is telling one of the young crewmates in the book. But before we hop into that, Jesse, you want to go over our the questions we talk about?
Yeah, so if you guys are familiar, we go over some Luke questions before we dive into the story. And the first one of those questions is, what state is Luke in as he begins his journey? How do the events and characters he encounters in this story impact his development as a hero? And is this consistent with the character presented in the films, current Marvel comics, and the new canon books? And with that said, Mike, we're going to cue the Luke clip.
Roll that beautiful Luke footage.
That is right. It's all true, all of it, unless it's a tall tale. Or, who knows?
Unless it's exaggerated.
So, before we dive too deep into this story, I would say, Mike, I don't know about you guys, and Zach, you haven't read all the stories in this yet, but all the stories in this have a sliding scale of reliability and truth, it seems like. And this one seems like on the higher end. So, for instance, the first story, which is super funny, we highly recommend you reading, is a sort of conspiracy theorist guy in a cantina drinking drinks and doing all these conspiracy theories.
An Alderaan truther, as you called him.
No, I called him Yavin truther is what I called him.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he said the Battle of Yavin was a fabrication by the terrorists and all this stuff, and it's really awesome. But so that one's more on the sliding scale of, we know that's not true because we know the canon of Star Wars. This one seems, to me, I don't know to you guys, but this one seems a lot more true. This seems like a first-hand account of Luke encountering this one individual, and that's going to lead us to the planet. But I just wanted to start there before we even got to the planet and stuff.
Much more so than the others.
Yeah, I was going to say, to me it seemed, I didn't read the others, but it seemed very true. Like it didn't seem exaggerated or out of character for the Luke that I think we know. Yeah. And there wasn't anything like too bizarre. The craziest thing, there were a couple details I picked up on in particular.
Yeah.
There's like a kilometer long like fishing pole, which I don't think in meters in the metric system, because I'm an American, but that seems insane, right?
Wow.
Almost 4 football field. That's crazy.
It said it went into clouds, so I don't know. We'll get there when we get there, I suppose. But let's start off where the story begins. We kind of see a cool thing to see out of canon, a whole new planet, right, Mike?
I mean, it is a whole new planet, but it's basically described in the opening as like Octu that we've seen in the sequel trilogy, a planet that's mostly water with some islands. Or I was actually first thinking Camino before they started talking about the islands. I was like, oh, it's another water planet. Or actually, I first went to that the first planet that the crew visits in Interstellar.
That's right.
Like, oh, it's just knee deep water everywhere.
Yeah.
So essentially, this planet it's called. I was mispronouncing. I don't know how you guys were saying it. I put it over here. Luel, something like that.
That's how the audiobook said it.
Excellent. And it essentially, Luel, and the native language of the people that live there, means the deluge, or the deluge of the sea. So it's just a giant ocean with very, very limited islands on it. And the people that live on this planet are humanoid. We were kind of led to believe they're more actual human. More like in Star Wars, we have different humans on different planets that are different types of humans, but they're different humans. And they live on these islands, and they have a relationship with these giant birds.
Yeah, giant birds that when they're first described in the story, they're is very intentional with like the X shape of this giant white thing takes off in the distance, and as Star Wars fans, you're supposed to go, "Oh, the X wings," but no, it's actually a bird with 4 wings that make an X.
Right.
Which, creative coincidence, I guess. I wasn't sure what they were supposed to look like based on description in the audiobook, but the picture that's in the book. I'll hold this up for the people watching. It's actually pretty cool looking.
Kind of like giant cranes with massive 2 sets of wings. So 4 wings in total. And we're told that they're like something like, how many meters across was it? It was like 30 feet across or
Big.
Something like that.
Something like that.
So,
yeah,
9 or 10 meters, I thought.
I thought the story was going to, because they say, it makes you think it's an X-Wing, and then they say, but this is a living vehicle or whatever.
Right.
And they describe the bird or whatever. But at first I was like, oh, we're going to learn like where the inspiration for the X-Wing came from.
Whoa.
And then they didn't go there at all. But I was
Yeah.
like, my assumption is that like someone's going to figure like, and then it's going to tie into Luke having an X-Wing, and like that's how this is going to lock in here. And then it went a hard left turn from there.
There's a little bit of that.
Yeah.
With the X.
Perhaps the birds actually only had wings, but in the tall tale, I heard from this guy who heard from this guy, they picked up the extra set to match the X-Wings or something.
Yeah.
But we initially joined a local on the planet, what's her name? Aya, and her brother, who they each have their own, what do they call these? Wind thruster. That's what the natives call these giant birds. And they were out hunting for some big fish,
Right.
Quiet native life. And Aya, she snares herself a really big
Marlin.
what they call it? Something marlin, yeah. Like a 3-meter long marlin that has 2-meter long horns sticking off of it like a triceratops, a real angry fish.
Yeah. And
Do you guys? Sorry, I didn't know.
No.
Do you guys? So I've noticed in the books they're way more comfortable now, actually using human Earth terms than they were in the old, in the old books. Like even the word Marlin to me is like a very earthy thing, right? Like that's not something you would expect to also find in a galaxy far, far away.
especially after reading Legends, right? I think we maybe had this discussion on the show one time before. I'm not sure.
No, I remember specifically not long after Disney bought Lucasfilm, I think it was an episode of the Jedi Journals podcast. They had one of the editors from Del Rey on talking about that specifically and how that was an intentional choice making to not keep people away with their own version of sci-fi mumbo jumbo, basically.
Sure.
Simplifying things a little bit to increase accessibility for new readers. And I've always remembered, because I was like, oh, I do remember all the special words we learned for different things in those Legends books, but it does make sense if you're trying to reach a wider audience to earthify just a little.
Sure.
It varies though. If you notice that, Zach, it varies from book to book in these canon books. It's sometimes it's rampant, like Heir to the Jedi. Oh my god. Or sometimes it's like minimal, or it's like minimal to none. It's minimal to none of this.
Well,
this system.
I feel like I was going to say, actually, I imagine it's because they're trying to make it more accessible, so that makes sense. But I feel like it's essentially the higher the reading level of the book, the more they're willing to not earthify it.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I feel like this Legends of Luke Skywalker, as an example, is pretty accessible just in terms of reading level and the content that you're getting. So I wouldn't be surprised if the kind of lower you get on that scale, the more they do that. Because when I read the Thrawn books, I don't think the new Thrawn books, I don't recall very many of any earthifying terms.
I like that you're running with that.
Yeah, earthify. Hashtag earthify. Yeah, I don't know. I understand it, and I definitely think the books need to be accessible. But it also kind of pulls me out a little bit of the universe.
Yeah, definitely.
I just remember every time a creature, even just basic things like coffee, it's like you have to basically connect the dots between the name, and they would be similar, like calf, right, or calf. It's like, but you have to connect the name and like they're describing it, and it's like, yeah, it's like, oh, that's just a seagull. Like that's what they're describing.
Yeah.
But they call it something else, right? So, anyways, I always liked that element of it, but I also get it.
Yeah, and here it's used as like a term, not necessarily. I haven't witnessed in this book yet this author use a correlation between an Earth thing and a Star Wars thing. But yeah, you're saying just the vocab word Marlin, right? That you're saying.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, if we discover aquatic life on Europa that looks like a marlin, are we going to call it something like a European marlin? I don't know.
You're like,
I'm really spitballing here.
But that's a good point, Zach. And that leads us right to the marlin. And this brings kind of our protagonist character in this story. She comes face to face with the marlin in the water because the way that they hunt in this society is the bird. Bird dives down deep, and they kind of jump off the bird and swim, and they have a bungee cord tying them to the bird. And as the bird's going back up to the surface, they kind of spear the fish and bring it up. And I don't know if you guys got any vibes from this, but I totally got the relationship in this with their bird and just like the way they dive down and all that stuff. It made me think of, for better or for worse, it made me think of James Cameron's Avatar. The Na'vi,
the mighty Ekron.
Yes, and the Na'vi's relationship with those, and how, depending who you are, you have different relationships with different, like in Avatar, like the strength and the the personalities of the different flyers. But that was kind of a fun part, and so she comes face to face with this fish.
Yeah, to expand on that, it's not like a pelican like skimming the surface.
Right.
It like described it in meters again. These things like dive 30 meters deep. And then the rider jumps off to go for the big fish.
Crazy.
And to like spear it and then kind of haul it to the top. And our protagonist, it makes it seem like she's pretty awesome at what she's doing. But the reason she's so good at literally catching and then, killing this giant space marlin is because she is connected to the flood.
That's right.
Wait, no, it's not the flood. It's the tide.
I was like,
different thing.
I was like, wait a second.
As soon as
flood?
I said
is that a horror
that's
movie?
not right. As soon as I said it, I was like, whoop, wrong one. The tide.
The tide.
Man, you're still on our.
Yeah, so,
you're still on my thing I was running with last week, Mike, with the.
I know.
Yeah, the Master Chief and Cortana and the Luke and Callista and the computer thing. That.
The book specifically talks about Aya reaching out with her mind to feel the tide, to predict what this giant space marlin is going to do. So, I mean, as readers, we know, oh my gosh, she's like connected to the Force, similar to that group that we met in the Yoda arc of the Marvel comics. Yeah, just sort of like an indigenous people with a natural connection to the Force.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm talking about in terms of the like Star Warsy terms versus the what do we call it? Earthify.
No, Earthify.
Where like
that's the name of the episode now.
That's right. When you were reading about the tide, capital T, you knew as a Star Wars person, right, that like they're obviously talking about the Force, and so they didn't need to tell you that this was the Force. In fact, they don't ever tell you that.
Yeah.
But it's like that kind of like sense of discovery, right, where it was like, oh, I get where you're at right now.
Yeah.
I don't know. I really like that. I thought that was cool.
Yeah.
I did too.
This is something that Mike and I have talked about a lot on the show. These are the best elements to me of some of the new canon and a lot of legends. Like, we talked about early on in our show, the courtship of Princess Leia, the original Dathomirian witches and that sort of thing. And Mike's, spinning around his chair, but they, not Jedi, not Sith, you know what I mean? Just indigenous people that using the Force, and in their case, they were using it through the dark side, but they still weren't trained in the ways we've seen in the movies, or they didn't have any understanding the same way we did. To them, it's almost a religious element.
Well,
Sure.
and I would say that Aya and her people, they seem trained in it, just perhaps not in ways that are familiar to the reader.
Yeah, they're trained to
Because
survive.
she clearly knew what she was doing.
Yeah, they're trained to survive with
it-
it, if that makes sense.
So she has killed and captured and killed the biggest space marlin that she's ever seen. It's too big, her and her wind truster, is that right? Her giant bird with 4 wings to carry back to the village. So sends her brother to get help, to bring back, somebody else on the bird so we can both carry it, as if 2 swallows were to share the coconuts as they fly. Try to do a little Monty Python thing.
Yeah, what's the speed of these
Zach's
birds?
just like,
Disaster
but
strikes.
before-
Yeah, disaster strikes.
before her brother gets back, the storms catch up with her, and she tries to escape. She abandons her prize, but it was all still too late. She gets caught up in this storm over a giant ocean, and it was fairly morbid to listen to on the audiobook.
Ooh.
Of how a lightning strike kills her wind truster,
Yeah.
and she's just sort of free falling. She's like, "Well, tide, take me and make it painless, please."
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, she's like reaching out to the ocean through the force and, spare my life. And yeah, that was indicative to me of the Navi thing too. We're talking about earlier. The she feels actually severed when her relationship is from this bird is killed. You know what I mean? And it's very similar to we've seen a lot in Star Wars with some native people, like the Sand People and their banthas, that sort of thing. When one of them dies, the other one is not okay. So and we're about to get onto that next week, actually, Mike. So, but
Oh crap, we are great.
that's right. But so this is kind of the state of the story, and we basically, before she plummets to her death, she sees an X shape come out of the sky, and this is why the reference was made earlier, because she thinks it's another one of these birds coming to save her, or maybe her brother, or someone like that, or an elder in her tribe. And she says that there are beams of light coming off of this bird, so it must be a holy bird from the tide, basically.
Well, and they specifically mention 5 red stripes on each wing.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like red 5, got
Red
it.
5.
I'm there.
Yeah, and so she is saved by what we presume to be Luke. In the next scene, she wakes up, and it's actually her tending the grave of her bird. It's a really cool jump in time. I really liked that. And then we see Luke in the background talking to the people of this tribe with his X-Wing parked right there.
It is a cool jump, but there's not even an attempt to guess or explain why or how Luke in his X-Wing in the middle of basically an ocean typhoon saved her. Like, did he just grab her with the force and drag her to an island out the window, or did he fly under her so she landed on the hood of his X-Wing?
I mean, you've seen movies where they fly the plane under and catch the person. But I mean, I think that the interesting thing about it is you have to ask who's telling the story and why they're telling it, right? And the finer details of that are not why they're telling the story. And it actually makes me think that the person telling the story is not
Aya.
It's not, right? It's not the girl.
Oh yeah.
She told the story. But someone told that story, and that story got told, and that story got told. And that's where I even wonder, did the birds have 4 wings, actually, right?
Yeah.
Was it actually the biggest marlin this world's ever seen?
Right.
Is she just exaggerating? Is the fishing pole really a kilometer long?
Still on that fishing pole.
My brain that wants to see every scene
Picture that.
Robot Chicken, though, has decided that Luke flew under her, and he made R2 get his little arms out and just kind of hold on to and drag her. He's like, "Hold on, R2," and as they flew to her island.
Well, to approach it from the way the story presents it, at least to me, I perceived it as Luke was called to this planet from the Force, as in he was told it was a place to learn about the Force, and as he's arriving, this is happening, he intervenes. And him, he was like, the Force kind of brought us together in a way, because I was just coming to this planet to learn things about the Force and your people, but I saw someone in trouble and I immediately intervened. And it kind of ties her and Luke together for the rest of the story, which is pretty interesting because Luke actually in this story wants to learn from the elders. So the next scene we see Luke talking to the elders about the tide and him tying the tide to the Force and then them saying it's different and Luke's saying no it's not and all this back and forth sort of thing. But Luke's basically saying he's intrigued because to them it is different, and even he thinks they're exactly the same, which is actually the lesson of this story we're going to learn at the end, that he has to learn as well. But he thinks he's got it fully figured out. He just, oh, you guys are using the Force just a different way from my understanding. And basically he says, can you teach me? And we get some cool Yoda quotes and things like that. And and Luke says do or do not. And basically the elders say do not. With the teaching.
Yeah.
Now, I will say, and I'm being significantly more negative than I'd like to be. Probably my only critique with this story are the Yoda quotes.
So they just keep popping up.
Well, yeah. The first time he does it, it's like, oh, that's nice. Like this is obviously after his time with Yoda. And he's learned and like whatever. But then it was like literally across like 3 or 4 pages, we got like 5 Yoda quotes.
I agree. Like, that stuck out to me too. Even just listening to it like on Audible, I was like, okay, we get it. We get it. He's talking about Yoda. We get it. We get it.
Yeah, it's almost like a fan service nod or something.
Yeah, and that's where it's like I feel like one of them would have been great, or one of them in the where they they're kind of bunched up, and then like one towards the end, maybe after he learns his lesson, where he like something Yoda said even has more meaning now that he's learned something. But yeah, it was just like I don't need it. Again, it was another thing that kind of pulled me out of the story. But anyways, continue.
Well, yeah.
I agree. It got me too. So
yeah, same.
I'm glad you brought that up.
That was probably the only element of this that actually did take me out. Yeah, where I was like, that's kind of weird that more than one has come up. So it's almost like the Luke we're being presented in these stories, which is the Luke that's kind of going on this sort of sabbatical pilgrimage across the galaxy, which we've now been told that's what Luke does at this time. I don't think he would be throwing around quotes from his masters willy-nilly. Potentially all the time, like saying and saying, to quote my master, you know what I mean? Yeah, that's the thing. If he was part of his vernacular and he just said it and didn't say to quote my master, if you cut that part out, I think it'd be great. But
there's different layers to that, right?
But so basically, Luke gets them to agree to test him because if he can pass all these tests, he's worthy of their knowledge, and they will teach him their ways about the Force and their knowledge of the Force passed down through several generations, and teach him about the tide. So then we go to the tests. So
yeah, and these tests to me immediately felt, video game trials, or tying it back to Legends, Jesse, the trials that Gantoris put Luke through on
the Jedi
whatever
trilogy.
Crappy volcano planet he lived on. I forget the name of it.
That's right.
It's
very similar to that. Yeah, tribal people, and they have an understanding of the Force a certain way, and Luke kind of shows up and says, I can, I want to learn from you, or I want to teach you. And they say, well, prove to me, you know what I mean? Prove to me that you're who you say you are, or we don't believe it,
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and he basically has to go on these trials that they send all their kids through,
right,
to determine if they actually understand the tide and aren't trying to. Because I think that's one of the, I don't know if you want to get into this at this point or not, but essentially one of the main things that separates the tide and the Force and the way they perceive it is that Luke views the Force as a tool to use.
right.
And very much a tool to use where he's wanting to use the light to get rid of the dark. Yeah. And they view the tide as, a luminous energy that binds the galaxy, and that it is what it is, and they aren't trying to control it or use it or manipulate it.
Well, and they specifically say, like, to attempt to manipulate it in different words is like wrong. Yeah, they're like, you just accept what the tide says, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's very basically they're sending him through these basic trials to more or less teach him, here's our fundamental view, very basic fundamental view of the tide. And if you prove to us that you understand that, then we might teach you more, kind of a situation.
Yeah.
That's right.
In the first trial, it reminded me very much of like Sega Genesis era video games where at a water level and your character, like Sonic or whoever, had to do stuff underwater, but you got your oxygen timer going off, you gotta find the big bubble so you can get a breath of air.
Yeah.
And he had to go around this underwater mountain just using these natural air vents to not drown.
Yeah, I thought Echo the Dolphin, Mike. Echo the Dolphin.
Oh,
The best, the best. And we're on a water world, and there's fish everywhere. Yeah, so I was all about it. So Luke has to basically go through this underwater kind of canyon network, basically. So just think of canyons that are dropped underwater, but he has to do it, while being underwater where he can't breathe. So
yeah,
what does Luke do?
And instead of just sticking his face in and learning to breathe the bubbles coming up like the kids native to the planet, he uses his cloak, which is apparently airtight now, to catch a bunch of bubbles.
I love it.
And it reminded me of the scene in the very first Pirates of the Caribbean where Jack Sparrow and I think whatever Orlando Bloom's character's name is, where they go underwater with the canoe upside down and they have a pocket of air with them.
That's true.
So he's like using his cloak as sort of like this giant kind of thing that he's sticking his head in every now and then to get air so that he's not going to drown completing this journey, which some of the natives said it was cheating, but they the elder Kayla consulted the rules and was like, well, we technically didn't say he couldn't do that, so I guess this counts as him completing the first trial.
That's right. And inventive way to beat the trial. And yeah, so, and it's interesting, everyone's kind of against him when he's doing that, the ingenuity there, but also Aya is kind of defending him throughout this, and she has some sort of, she said she had felt a weird strange tie to him through the tide because he saved her, and she felt kind of like I need to defend him. And we haven't mentioned this yet, and I think this is one of the coolest parts. They don't call him Luke Skywalker once again in this again in this story. Luke Skywalker is never mentioned, just like the second story, the Jakku battlefield story. This is just a guy that comes, and we're led to believe he's Luke from the red stripes, and the domed head of his vehicle, blue and white, and the brain of his vehicle, that's what they called it. And they call him the Seeker because he's the seeker of knowledge and the Force. And so the whole story, Luke is referred to as the Seeker, which is pretty fun. But then that leads us to the second trial, right? Unless there's anything in between that I'm forgetting.
Yeah, no, they go pretty quickly into the second trial where Aya has to train Luke how to circumnavigate the planet on a wind truster. That's a very ridiculous sentence to say out loud, but he has to fly one of their big four-winged birds around the planet.
Yeah, he has to circumnavigate the entire planet, and this is kind of the... They pin it as the final trial for him, but they kind of tag one at the end as well, but they don't tell him that yet.
Well, this is where actually another detail was both ludicrous to me and also like made me think that the details are less meaning, like they don't really matter. This is just a legend that's being told by someone, because they were talking about circumnavigating the planet and it being a 30-day process.
Yeah.
And I was just like, really, like it's gonna take a month to fly around this planet, and it's like I get it, but it was also just like, why are they even saying this? Like they just have to go around the planet, and then you show how much time. Yeah, I know, but it's just like it was just one of those things where like you start stacking up these various things. It's like someone's telling this over a beer, and like making up these giant details to like make it because. Anyways, continue. Yeah, so he has to go around the planet on this, but she goes with him, right, as a guide.
That's right. They kind of choose her as the guide. They say you're tied to the Seeker, and you will give him a hard enough time, but also keep him alive. But also you're not going to give in and show him all our secrets. But you're ready. And the elders basically say, take our bird. Our bird has circumnavigated the planet over 7 times. So that
Take my mighty Akron.
but they give Luke a young bird who's never done it before, but they said the bird is capable. So they go on this journey, and it's kind of like this. It's kind of fun. It's kind of this like Castaway meets like world traveling sort of story here at the end. They're because they have to eat, they have to drink water, they have to manage the bird's strength, things like that. They have to manage the gusts on the planet and kind of ride those, things like that. And at the whole time, Luke, the Seeker, and Aya are kind of bonding throughout this story, I suppose.
Sure. I thought this was. I thought the culture on the planet and the tribe and the interaction between Luke and her were all very strong. So this whole period where she's kind of going around the planet and learning, I thought it was really well done, and I thought it was really cool to read about.
Yeah, and they talk about the difference between the Force and the Tide, but more importantly, Luke starts talking about his travels outside of this planet, because of course he's been, as we know, all sorts of places, but she's never left the planet, and she's kind of reflecting back the farm boy Luke to Luke in this story. And he starts talking about he's been in battles, which, Luke's like, have you been in many battles to 3PO and R2 and all this sort of thing. And then she kind of looks at him like, how can he be a follower of the Tide but be warlike? And she's starting to have like second thoughts that he's actually uses the Tide in the dark side way. And, I don't know if we mentioned this explicitly enough earlier, but the elders didn't want Luke to be trained by them because they foresaw that he was going to use the Tide as a tool, but more than a tool for darkness and the dark side. And he said, well, let me prove to you through your trials that I want to use it for the light. And he's not getting the point that they're trying to make quite yet. But it's interesting that he starts having these conversations with Aya on the way, and he starts realizing they have a different view of the Force. And also he's talking about the world that lives outside of her, and it's vast and exciting to her, but it's also pretty scary. Like they're not warlike people. So hearing that Luke was in these major conflicts, kind of disturbs her.
Well, I also got the sense that it was intriguing to her.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
It was both, made her concerned and maybe also curious at the same time.
Yeah.
Like, he's not supposed to do that.
Yeah.
Why'd he do it?
Yeah, well, and it's also just like, starting to realize there's more to the world than just your tribe and where you've been your whole life. Because by the end of the story, it felt like she was interested in like seeing other parts of the galaxy.
So this kind of puts us in an interesting question. This is kind of one of our questions on the show. How do Luke's interactions in this story with the main characters in this story contribute to his growth? Well, we're about to get to that with the final trial, but I feel like at this point, Luke's kind of learning that once again, not everyone uses the Force like a Jedi or Sith. And that is kind of confusing for him at this stage. And he doesn't know quite to know what to do with that, even though this is a wise Luke. This is a several years post Return of the Jedi Luke, we're led to believe, but he's still learning from just regular people, which is kind of interesting. And our next question that we encounter a lot is, does Luke grow in the Force in this story? Does he level up in a way? I wouldn't say so much he levels up with his powers, but we're about to get to the point in the story where he might level up with his insight and his way he looks at the Force, I think.
Yeah. he's gaining some ability score improvement to like his wisdom, if you want to put it in those terms.
Yeah.
He's learning about how other people level up in the Force.
And that leads us right to the final trial, which is they almost get to the end of the planet, the full circumnavigating of the globe, and they reach this part of the planet where essentially it's very dangerous. The wind currents are non-existent to minimal, and she basically tells Luke, this is the hardest part. This is what the elders want to see if you get through, and if you get through this, you might be able to train under us. And, it's dangerous because the birds can't glide or soar anymore. There's a lot of elements going on. And then she kind of throws the final trial on top of Luke at the same time It says, well, the real final trial is you've got to construct this giant fishing rod out of the elements of your saddle, and then you have to spear a fish while in this non-current, non-wind region at the end of the world, basically. And that's our final right.
And like, because there's no wind and the doldrums, I think is what they were called.
Yeah, that's right.
The birds also won't go down to the water because they're afraid they won't be able to get back up,
right,
because there's no wind to fly off of. So it's this weird scenario where you only have so much time while you're there to actually make it happen, right? To build this kilometer long fishing device, and then also use it to, from pretty high up, right, actually get a fish, which I think part of that was, and again, if this isn't, it may or may not be intentional, but it felt like they were kind of foreshadowing the eventual Luke's Island uses the giant spear to get the fish down below.
Absolutely.
And he's got the the giant marlin, right? And it's just like,
that's pretty cool, right?
I get it, but I also feel like they just tie, kind of like with the Yoda quotes, where like if they do it too much, then like all this stuff kind of interlaces too heavily instead of interlacing to these outer elements that make the universe seem very big. So
yeah, I definitely understand what you're saying, and I was bothered similarly by the Yoda quotes, but I actually appreciated this tie-in to Luke and the giant like pole fishing on Octu, because how's a kid who grew up on a desert planet gonna know how to spear fish? He has to learn it from some people.
Spear fish from Stories and Stories Up. So
yeah, it's a big fish.
And we didn't mention yet, but the biggest and best fish are in this region. They are the golden marlins. They are the most prized possession of these people, and they only live in this area, is what we're told. So, and that's what Luke's supposed to spear.
I get a sense on a macro level, which we may. I'll just wait till we get to the. We'll come back to the Luke's Island in a minute.
Yeah.
So he has to get this fish, right, and essentially she gets a fish to show him what's going on, and they tell him it's like, I don't remember what the weight was, but it was like, 5 or whatever, 5 kilograms. I don't know what it was. And then he's got one and he gets it, and then she's basically saying that it looks like it's at least 100 of what, like this giant biggest fish ever. Right. And he has to basically, like, the other thing is, I kind of skipped probably the most important part. Yeah.
Please do.
Which is, when he's fishing, right? It's like he's almost getting it over and over and over again, and he's not. And then she's like, basically tells him, the problem is that you're trying too hard, right?
And you're trying to use
you're
trying to use the force as a tool to spear the fish, when that's not.
He was trying to like use the force to capture the fish, right? And then instead, she's like, you need to pay attention and to let the tide bring the fish to you, essentially. Mm-hmm. So it's a more passive version of interacting with the force in that way.
Yeah, and she's basically like, you have to. It's very much the stuff we've seen with Jedi, but it's just to Luke. He was thinking of using the force as a tool to stab the fish right at the right time and maybe guide the spear through the force. And she's saying, let go of everything to the tide, which we know is to the force. And your mind, the tide, and the fish and the spear will all line up simultaneous if you let go of everything and have no fear, basically. And it's kind of like Luke's being trained all over again from Yoda, but from a child, a 12-year-old child who's lived in this culture and has a different understanding of the Force. And Luke does spear the fish eventually. It takes him a really long time, but he does, when she kind of tells him that last tidbit. But the fish gets off the pole, basically, and it also weighs way too much for his bird to carry back. And as we talked about earlier, they're in the most treacherous area of the planet. They've got to finish and get back, or it's potentially dangerous.
Well, I think it wasn't even that the fish went off the pole as much as it was Luke made the decision to let it go.
Yeah.
Because essentially, I think what he realized is he learned the lesson that he was there to learn, and he didn't need to keep fighting it. is the sense I got, right? Where it was like
Yeah.
he'd actually let go even of his desire to learn from them. And that was what it the representation of him letting the fish go was basically him acknowledging that like they're either going to train me or not. And that's fine. I feel like I've already learned kind of a situation.
Yeah, and I think he was in that level up mindset like we're talking about, and he already got why the Force draw him to that planet. Like he got the lesson. He has leveled up in his wisdom, as Mike said, and he already has a different understanding of the Force and the way people use the Force. And so Luke and Aya go back to the elders, and they're like, you came this close. You made it all the way around the world. You speared the fish, and then you let it go and came right back to us. No one's really gotten that far before, but, you're not going to be trained by us now. And Luke said, okay, basically. And he just fully accepted it. And I thought that was pretty interesting, like just echoing what you just said, Zach. It was kind of his acknowledgement of that and his peace with that. And he's like, I've already learned everything you could have taught me. And they said, we figured that out too. That's what the elders say. They basically said that some ways failures a teacher is basically what they say, through paraphrasing. And this of course leads to The Last Jedi, but it's pretty interesting that they're even like, well, we kind of trained you because you learned. But
I think that's a good lead into our last question. Is what we've seen consistent with Luke as presented in films and comics in the new canon books? And since we've brought up that scene in The Last Jedi, I think this is fairly consistent. Like, right. Farm boy had to learn how to kilometer-long spearfish somewhere. But just the fact that he's on, Octu, planet most covered in water when we do meet him in episode 8. I really do like this tie-in, and even though all of things are probably exaggerated in the tall tale aspect of it, I do really like the lessons that he learns here, and I feel like a lot of that he does pass on to Rey. Not as directly as the natives do with like the tide and you just follow the tide, but telling her to pay attention to the whole force, not just the light, but the good and the bad,
That's kind of what I was gonna say earlier when I was talking about the macro level Last Jedi element of this, which is like I almost feel like the way they operate is how Luke is operating when we first interact with him in the sequels.
Right.
In that he's basically, they're essentially saying, one thing we've kind of referenced a few times is like how other people use the Force. But, in my mind, I don't think that the people in this chapter of the book use the Force. I think that they acknowledge that they're a part of the Force.
Yeah.
And use it to sense, but they don't ever use it active, in the active sense.
Right.
Yeah, they actively avoid actively using it, if that makes sense. Like they're like, no, we're not going to do that. We're just going to exist part of it.
Yeah. So Luke in some ways acts like that. He's obviously disconnected himself from the Force in The Last Jedi, but the fundamental idea of like, essentially he's talking about the Jedi need to end, and like even in the deleted scene where Rey goes to like save the caretakers, he's like, what the books would have a real Jedi do right now, right? And she's like ignoring him because she's like, we have to go help these people. And he's like, well, the books would say if you can't maintain balance, don't act. Which is essentially like, if you use the Force, the light of the Force to basically push out the dark, it's kind of like a rubber band in that like you pulled it, and now when you let go, it's going to go back the other direction just as hard. So it definitely feels like there's some foreshadowing in like his eventual evolution and just understanding the Force as a, it even says in The Last Jedi, right, where it's like to say the light belongs to the Jedi is, is it arrogance or hubris? I don't know which one he says. Where it's like the light doesn't belong to anybody. There's the light and the powerful light, powerful dark. The Force is the Force, right? So it very much felt like, while they are obviously, it's pretty cool. It's that classic, like with Yoda, seems very primitive, but has a very advanced conceptual knowledge of the Force. Yeah, which I thought was super cool. I mean, I'd I would be super into like one of my dream realities of a movie series or TV shows for Star Wars is like 5, 10,000, 20,000 years in the past, and it's like just super primitive.
Yeah.
Like the original legend stories of like the origins of the Sith and whatnot.
Right.
Where like it's just this primitive people on the planet or the moon Sith, and it's like it's just very rudimentary, and they're figuring out how to connect to this energy and the Force and stuff. So, anyways,
I really enjoyed this story. I enjoyed. I don't know. I like all this like direct Luke time. Some of it is a little fan servicey. Some of it is a little too much. Where he's like, "My master said," but we got a great world. We got a great world, great characters, and I really like the people. Like if I was playing the Star Wars RPG with Mike or Zach again, and this world came up, I would go to it. I'd love it for a brief adventure. But I don't know. I'm really enjoying this book so far, Zach. I know you just started, but it's very concise, well written short stories that don't overstay their welcome. This was the longest one yet, by far.
I think it's the longest one in the book, actually.
By far, this was the longest one. So it's kind of nice, and that they're all kind of around Luke is pretty fun, and they all have kind of different tone, which I like as well. But so far, I like that second one the best. But I'm excited to read more of these, and it's good to keep going through these, and I like the Luke that's presented here because I know once again we don't have much in the way of Luke. We have comics, we have this, and we have the dreaded elephant in the room, heir to the Jedi. So
you keep bringing it up, we can just ignore it.
Zach read that too. So
yeah, we can act like it doesn't exist. It's really not what you want it to be. So I mean, I would say in general, like I enjoyed this book. I enjoyed this chapter so far. I like the tall tale element. I actually feel like I wish a lot of the books I have read so far from canon were written like this, and it doesn't necessarily need to be the tall tale, but the short story.
Yeah,
because I don't, there's like in this this chapter, it's like there's less plot happening, so to speak. But I'm okay with it because it's just it's a short story, right?
Yeah.
So like, I'm not expecting major plot things, and I feel like it's actually such a great medium for character development because, you basically, like in the Queen's Shadow book, if it had been Padme dealing with responding her first session in the Senate, and Padme dealing with passing a bill, right? And Padme dealing with the Chancellor kind of being the Chancellor about things, and so on and so forth. It's like, then I don't necessarily need a plot because each of these little stories is literally just about one or two little things that the character learns each time.
Well, and to bring up Aftermath again, I feel like Chuck Wendig kind of went for the best of both worlds because they had their main story about the characters introduced there, but my favorite parts of those were the interludes that were about side characters that we were familiar with, like Dengar fighting with an bounty hunter on a rooftop on Narshada, I think. We learned about the acolytes of the Sith through one of those interludes. So he's like shooting for the best of both like sides of that. And thought about that before.
Jawas selling moisture farmer burnt pieces of Mandalorian armor. I wonder where the Jawa got those. But there's some interesting things. I enjoyed that a lot too, Mike. But overall, this is an enjoyable story. I look forward to more of this. And unfortunately, Mike and I are running dry soon on Luke content and canon. But we're only at the beginning of Legends. Only at the beginning. Is that right, Mike? So that's right. And we're currently in, Zach, what I call the second dark chapter of Legends, which is not quite New Jedi Order onward, and not quite the first act, which was Shaz the Empire and Thrawn and Jedi Academy. We're in that weird middle act of Legends, which really no one likes to return to. But Mike and I are returning to those, and we're rereading all of those and analyzing Luke and those stories.
Because we hate ourselves. So let's move on from this story. We got a lot out of discussion on more than I thought we might. So before we move on to Celebration Talk, I do just want to give a quick plug to our Patreon. If you are a fan of the Canon Cantina, you can head over our Patreon page, patreon.com/The Canon Cantina, where you can find, if you subscribe at the $5 tier or higher, a second podcast. We do another show called the Canon Cantina Secret Stash. It used to be called something else. We changed it for reasons. But the next episode of that is going to up this week, and we've already recorded it. And that episode, Jesse and I rank the 20 Marvel Cinematic Universe films that led up to Captain Marvel, because he hadn't seen it yet at the time. Have you seen Captain Marvel yet?
Are you talking to me or Zach?
Yeah, well, both of you.
I have not seen it yet, but I like that round.
I have seen it.
I like that round number of 20. That's why we did this episode. The 20.
Yeah. It's a good movie that's not going to totally destroy our list, but we did rank the 20 that led up to it. We had a good time. And we did agree on some things that I didn't expect to. We maybe also shouted some disagreements at each other, and we probably had to go into a re-ranking of the Chris's involved with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But if you are interested in our second show that's not just about Star Wars, or if it is about Star Wars, it's not just about Luke Skywalker, head over to our Patreon page and join us at the $5 tier for some great exclusive content.
That's right. And those of you guys that do that currently, we appreciate you. You're our favorite people. And the Canon Cantina patrons directly support the show and the growth by helping our monthly and annual fees, while of course contributing to future content and this extra stuff on the side that Mike was just talking about. And Mike, I think we got a producer credit to mention this week, if you remember.
Yes. I was yelled at in person by our producer, Rob Roundy, about a previous Secret Stash episode, so I don't think he's going to yell as much at our Marvel rankings, but you are right. We promise a shout-out on every episode, so thank you, sir, Rob, for all your support.
So if you want a shout-out every episode, become a producer, so there you go. And I did not want to miss him this time, Mike. I did not want to miss him, so...
No, you're right. We did last time.
This is a lot more exciting episode than Children of the Jedi to have your first producer shout out. But that leads us to the next and potentially
the fun stuff,
most important part of the show. We mentioned at the beginning of the show, guys, we mentioned that the three of us went to Celebration pre The Force Awakens. What a time to go. And the three of us are going again this year, which is very exciting. Bringing this full circle, I mean, Zach and I are even caravanning up together from Tulsa to Chicago because we are traveling via roads, you know.
Y'all are crazy.
So maybe a little bit.
Chicago is one of those weird trips because it's about 9 hours in a car.
10 and a half.
And
10, right? I'm questioning everything.
I think it's well, it depends on how aggressively you stop.
Oh yeah. I think it's easily 11.
Even
easily 11 for a lot of people from Tulsa, but.
Well, I'm used to the 9.5, 10 hour version of that trip. But so 10 hours, the problem is there's not a ton of direct flights from Tulsa. Right. Even then, it's you have to fly out at a certain time. You have to take all your stuff with you. You have to bring all your stuff back. And then the actual airport in Chicago, at least the Southwest airport, is actually an hour southeast of the city. So you get there and then you either have to public transport or rent a car and drive an hour anyway.
Are you talking Midway?
So, yeah.
Hey man, I'm southwesting into Midway, but that's still faster than driving for me.
Yeah.
So,
well, yeah. Yours is a longer drive. But yeah, for us it's just that range where if it was more than 12 or 13 hours, there's no way I would be driving.
Well, and usually 8 hours is the threshold for me, but something about that Chicago trip isn't too bad. The 10 hours straight up and through St. Louis and all that. I don't know. I've done it a couple times before. I'm not really looking forward to it, but the fact that we're all we're caravanning, that'll make it more fun, and I'll have some fun things to do, at least on our Mike and I's Instagram and stuff, because Mike's just going to be getting on a plane. There's nothing exciting there. So surely Zach and I will do something exciting on the way, whether it's get a meal or something, but
who
knows? We'll see where the wind takes us. But Celebration, it is dangerously close now, guys. I mean, it's literally, let's be real. I mean, it's really 2 weeks away from our travel point, right, Zach? Almost.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So that's pretty intense to think about. Scaring me a little bit, but in a good way, I think. Mike's still waking up in cold sweats like Anakin did.
It's
and
true.
in the prequel trilogy, and he's about to go just confide in Palpatine to make him stop. So
How do I get more than 3 people to show up? No. So if you're going to do one thing at Star Wars Celebration, on Saturday, April 13th
right.
at 2 p.m., come to the podcast stage and we're going to be doing our live show there. But beyond that, what are you guys excited to be doing? I think the bulk of the schedule has released to this point. Like, what's the thing? And it's okay if we all have the same answer because I think we might. But what's the thing you're most excited for at Celebration?
For me, it's obviously just the whole trip itself. But the one thing is just essentially the episode 9 panel / probably title reveal, trailer reveal.
It's gonna be a lot.
I remember when we were together and we watched that first trailer for episode 7, and then like right after BB-8 comes on the stage, etc. Like it was just like a very like, oh my god, this is really happening moment.
Yeah.
So, and this is it. This is episode 9, and they've been saying this is the end of the saga, right? The Skywalker saga. So I'm assuming they'll stick to that, and I'm looking forward to just enjoying it one last time, right?
That's true.
This is kind of
well,
a big
so
grand conclusion.
I'm looking forward to being in the theater with you two this time because if you remember back to that first Celebration, my flight didn't get in till that morning, so I was watching on my phone plugged into the wall, just at the edge of the convention center. Like, okay, I know Jesse and Zach are in there, but I'm gonna watch this thing on my like little phone screen, and it was still awesome then. So I'm hoping that it's gonna be even more awesome to actually hopefully be in the theater if I'm to get picked for the line lottery or however we're doing things this year.
That's right.
Well, the arena it's in is apparently supposed to hold 10 or 12,000 people, so your odds are much higher than it was in Anaheim, where it was, I think, 3,000 people or something.
That's a good point, and I think that's going to be synonymous for all of us. That's what I'm looking forward to the most, because what a way for them to do it, as we've said, holding back the title, holding back the trailer. And, of course, we know JJ's going to come out with Kathleen Kennedy, and then they're probably going to bring out several, if not most of the actors from the film out. And then that's going to end with the trailer, and that's going to be kind of our inception into this weekend, really, because Thursday's a soft day, and Friday's kind of the full-on you're in. So
I'm going to bet you both right now a beer while we're there that Mark Hamill will not be at Celebration. He's not going to come out during the episode 9 panel. We already know he's not doing autographs or photo ops. I'm willing to bet he's skipping it entirely.
Whoa.
What do you think?
I'm not willing to bet against you.
Yeah, that's. I might bet against you just to have hope,
just to do
and
it.
Just to do it.
Yeah.
But I hope he comes. I don't think he has to
and
do
again,
autographs.
that's not me saying I wish he wasn't. That's not the case. I hope he's there, but I'm thinking that he's just shot his mouth off enough lately that they're like, you can skip this one. It's okay, Mark.
What if we bet a beer on something a little bit more interesting, which would be, but still high stakes, which would be, I would bet a beer that this is the first year and last year that Adam Driver comes. This would be his time. Cash it in, be done. Yeah.
I mean, I have to imagine that there will be at least a celebration after episode 9 where they have Daisy and Adam and John Boyega there and doing either photo ops / autographs / both.
No, I'll take this action though. I will bet that he's not going to be there.
Okay.
At all? Okay, I'm here to witness it.
You're here to witness.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I've lost plenty of worse bets than that. I don't think Adam Driver will be there. I don't want to lay bets on everybody that might show up.
No, I think it's high stakes with Adam. I think it's kind of 50-50.
I think that's a very good pick. Yeah.
Either one of us, it's pretty. I don't think it's his thing, and I think he tries to distance himself and just play the character. But if there was a time he were to do it, I think it would be this year 100%, because it's kind of his way. He can he can lock it away too. I don't know. That's just kind of now.
So other than I mean, we could, but I don't want to bet that many beers. Other than episode 9 stuff, what's maybe the thing you're like next most excited about, since that was pretty
I mean,
obvious?
there's all of it, right? So I want to go to the Mandalorian panel and see the Mandalorian trailer for the first time. I want to see the Vader Immortal panel. I'm going to go to the Fantasy Flight Games panel. I'm excited to see your guys' podcast.
Right.
I'm excited to see there's a Clone Wars panel as well. So like, bring it on. It's really the first live action TV show. We got plenty of other TV shows happening. We have a whole an episodic movie. I wouldn't be shocked if we got some surprise like what's past episode 9, and they may not. They may want to focus everything on episode 9.
That's true.
But like, there's been rumors going around about, the Thrones, David and Dan being like Old Republic centered style
The
stuff.
first Star Wars movies I skip. Maybe not. Yeah, that's a thing for long-time listeners. No, I think that it's not a long shot to say they'll announce something about that. But yeah, like it would be very cool if they did that too. For me, the thing I'm next most excited about, being the Disney nerd I am, is the Galaxy's Edge.
Sure.
It's like right before ours on Saturday. I am excited to just move into a theme park and just stay there for the rest of my life.
For life, yeah. It's everything I've read about it seems incredible. So that's exciting too. I'm even excited about the Phantom Menace 20th anniversary panel.
Yeah. No, I am
Could
too.
be fun, yeah.
No.
I need to watch it again before we go.
I just want to see Jesse's face if Ewan McGregor comes out on stage. See, he's blushing already, and it's just an idea.
Oh yeah, and like there will be tears if that's a reality.
Yeah.
We'll make sure to get that on camera. He's getting clipped again.
Yeah, man, that's good. Yeah, that's kind of the thing, the way of things. I think they're holding a lot to the chest. As you're kind of saying, Zach, all this is very exciting. I kind of think for me, maybe the Mandalorian's the most exciting, just because it's going to be the most unknown. Like I'm obviously a diehard Clone Wars fan, as you know, for years. I've converted a lot of people to Clone Wars. So obviously that's going to be exciting to go to that, because when I went to the Clone Wars panel the year we went, it was just kind of like, well, Clone Wars is dead. Here's the lost episodes panel. You know what I mean? So that's gonna be a whole nother experience in itself. There's gonna be electricity there with Dave talking about the Clone Wars final season. But I think the Mandalorian is the most intriguing to me, because I mentioned this to someone the other day, Zach. But when we went to that Rogue One panel, that was my favorite panel of that year, because it was the most different thing and it was the least pressure. It was just kind of people sitting around talking about the movie. It wasn't like this giant production. It was, hey, we're trying something new in Star Wars, and here's some of our ideas. Here's some concept art. Here's some stills. What do you guys think?
Here's a teaser.
Yeah, exactly.
They did the audio kind of teaser thing. And that was super cool. So yeah, I mean, I'm curious. I'm curious to see if there's a bunch I know I'm excited about seeing, but it's usually the stuff I don't know about that's the most memorable as time goes on, right? Which is like, I remember the various conversations with people in line, or when we go out to drinks after, and the stories that you're hearing, and the people who met people, and autographs, and all that kind of stuff. So just across the board, it's just if you love Star Wars, right? It's like a week dedicated to something that you're very passionate about, that a whole lot of other people are passionate about.
That's true.
So it's just a cool thing to be a part of.
Yeah, we've talked about that before.
Yeah.
It's more about the essence, the atmosphere, the experience. Like, people are like, well, I can just watch it from my TV at home, the main panels, and they're like, yes, you can, but like, there's
if you're unable to go, that's a great solution.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing wrong with that.
But kind of like Zach's saying, like,
that's what I had to do the last one.
Just going is like, just going and experiencing it. Even if you somehow missed panels or you didn't win the lottery, I still would say that's like at least 60% of the experience, and that's a high number. You know what I mean? Like, I would be upset if I somehow missed all the panels, but at the same time, if I still got to be on the floor hanging out with people, You know what I mean? Getting the beers like we were when we were in lines, things like that. There's a Star Wars family element, and this is coming from somebody who's been to a lot of cons of a lot of different types, and there's just not that sort of family feeling at other cons like Star Wars Celebration.
As long as I get to see the running of the Wilro hoods, I'll be happy.
That's right.
I'm actually really curious how so this is the first celebration post The Last Jedi.
Right.
And I'm curious how that's going to go. Because I remember even in lines I went to Florida back in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And, you know, there was definitely a contingent of people that weren't the biggest fans of The Force Awakens. And obviously at least the internet amount of people that didn't like Last Jedi was significantly higher. At least the people were much more vocal. So I am curious, like, what the conversations in various lines is going to be like, what the tone around everything is going to be like. The reality is that the McCormick Center in Chicago is one of the biggest convention centers in the States, and they sold out way sooner than they did with the other previous celebrations. So there's no shortage of Star Wars love and fandom right now.
That's right.
Which is exciting. So I'm just genuinely curious to see how that plays out. You know?
Perhaps we need to take bets on how many people in lines I start fights with who say The Last Jedi is bad.
Yeah. Well, and it's one thing to say it's bad or to not like it.
Right.
But, you know, even with people I'm close to having these conversations, it's like for most people that love Star Wars, I think, and especially people that go to something like Celebration, it's a very personal thing. And so it's very easy for, you know, it to feel like, even if it's not the case, when you respect, you know, the person you're talking to, for it to feel like the other person is discounting your opinion, you know, thinks you're less of a fan because of, you know, how you view things or whatever, or like, you know, is just it gets frustrated because you aren't sympathizing. I empathize with the fans that didn't like it, but I don't sympathize. And so, like, when that's what they're looking for and that's not what they get, either direction,
right.
It can just create friction. And so I feel like, you know, I remember back in 2015 when we went to Anaheim, it was like we were talking about in lines, you talk about the prequels. And it's like 99.9% of people at that point were fine with, like, yeah, these weren't the best movies. There was some pretty bad writing, dialogue, etc. But, like, it is what it is. And I don't feel like that with The Last Jedi, that's ever going to be the case. I don't think it'll ever be like
it's not there yet. That's for sure.
Yeah, I don't think most people will ever feel one way about it. And I actually like it. I mean, I think there's been more discussion since Last Jedi about Star Wars in the fandom than ever. But at the same time, it's like, can positivity be maintained? And can the wholesomeness be maintained in those conversations? Because, you know, I'm happy to talk about Last Jedi for a week while I'm at Celebration, but I also don't want to just, like, constantly be having the same conversation about, you know, here's why I liked it, and the other person's like, here's why I didn't like it, and then it's like,
want to fight about it.
Well, I wouldn't call this pushback, but my only response to that, Zach, would be, I would say, especially with your reference to the prequels and your prequel example, I would say Star Wars Celebration is probably the best Star Wars people to be around when it comes to things like that. Does that make sense? So, like, if you're around, like, I mean, there's just there's so many people that like Star Wars, right? And then there's the people that go to Celebration, and I'm not saying they're better or worse. I'm just saying they're a certain devoted group. And I feel like that's the place where, like you said about the prequels, people would be maybe more forgiving or more positive rather than just so like, well, it's this and it's done. And to maybe take that to The Last Jedi, I know The Last Jedi is more polarizing for a lot of reasons than the prequels, but at the same time, aren't those the best people to kind of talk about it? I'm not saying that.
Well, I guess, you know, the thing for me is like there was definitely a difference in the general vibe from Anaheim to
Okay.
Orlando.
Okay.
In Orlando, it was
That's
less
interesting.
like
That is interesting.
it wasn't negative at all. It was just The Force Awakens was, you've all heard the complaints about The Force Awakens as much as I have.
Sure.
And so there was more of a vibe of like, I love Star Wars, but I'm not quite sure yet on the new trilogy. And then I feel like what's happened with The Last Jedi is that there's a good number of people who are now regardless of which way they went, they're now decidedly one way or another, where either the sequel trilogy is great and I love it and I respect it, or I can't believe this is the direction they're going. I'm upset. I didn't like the portrayal of Luke. I didn't like this, that, or the other. And so, like, I'm just curious how that pans out, because back in Anaheim, we didn't even have Force Awakens, right?
That's right.
And I think the general vibe at that convention was like, we're just grateful there's more Star Wars coming.
True.
But 4 years later, we've had Episode 7, Episode 8, Solo, and Rogue One. We've had 2 different new cartoons, etc. We've had all the comics. We've had the canon of books replaced, and even on the books, right? I think a lot of people were very attached to the previous canon, and are finding the new canon not as fulfilling, right? And I've heard those complaints left and right. So I'm mostly just curious, because I'm satisfied. I'm enjoying the new content that's coming out. I'm happy with it. I understand it. But I'm curious how the people that don't enjoy it, how much of the population at Celebration are those people, and then how they actually like deal with that, right? Is it are they okay with it, or is it like, are they like, they have this like burden or this weight on them they're looking to just get off by like constantly talking to people who feel the other way about
Oh
it?
no.
I have an answer for that I will share off air. Is there any last minute thing that we just want to share that we're excited to do at Celebration? Like, I know for me, I'm looking forward to the movie trivia Schmodown 5-Way that's on Friday on the fan stage, and then at a theater later, myself and one of our crew, David, that's with us, have tickets to the finals. If you are not familiar with the movie trivia Schmodown, that's a really great YouTube series put on by Kaleido. And they're doing some special Star Wars specific content at Celebration. Jesse and I also are going to the Force Center podcast live one night that's at a brewery. So that's like 2 of our favorite things colliding right there.
For real. Podcasting and breweries. Yeah. Our names are already on the list somehow, but I signed up in my sleep. But yeah, just that. And I think for me, guys, it's like we were talking about, it's the atmosphere, it's the meeting people there, and it's kind of seeing where the night takes you, as funny as that sounds. This happens at all cons, as we all know, but I think at Star Wars it's exceptionally special. Especially it's going to, I think, for Mike and I this year when we get to meet all the other fellow podcasters. But I'm down to do whatever when the panels are done every night. You know what I mean? I'm going to be running on fumes by the end of this, but it's all going to be worth it. And I
can't believe it's 5 days now. Oh my God.
Start training now. But it's just the in-between moments to me that make it truly special. And it's like I said, when Mike, Zach, and I here waited for 3+ hours and The Force Awakens prop line, if you guys remember that, maybe
did do that.
Maybe 4+ hours now that I recollect, because we got in line.
I think you're tall-tailing that a little bit. It was probably closer to 3.
We got in line first thing when the doors opened, and I remember us basically getting out of there around lunch.
Or I'm repressing the
I
memory.
remember us getting out of there around lunchtime, but we still had great conversations sitting in line, and then we would send what I call the beer courier, which was one of us, to go get waters and beers. Of course, you got to do both. You got to do both, and bring those back. And then every once in a while, Zach or I would go get a coffee, and someone always held our place in line. And it's just like those in between moments between the big stuff that's really fun. It's where you really make the really nice memories, and you meet people too, which is awesome. And I can't wait to meet more people that love Star Wars. And just experience Star Wars for 5 days straight with a giant Star Wars family. So
it's gonna be wild.
It's gonna be wild.
Yeah. All right. So before wrap it up, we do have a new review to read real quick. This is from Elvina. Sorry, I don't know exactly how you want me to say that, but you did title this amazing podcast on Star Wars, all caps. And you just said, must listen to this, 1, 2, 3, 4 exclamation marks. Wonderful stuff. Love it, all caps with 1, 2, 3, 4 exclamation marks after it. Thank you so much for yet another awesome 5-star review. Still haven't hit that 1 star. Like, if you write that 1 star and you're really funny, like, I promise I'm going to do something awesome, my man, as long as it's really funny out there. But or don't do that. Just keep giving the awesome reviews because it keeps Jesse happy. I think I make his soul die a little bit every time I say that.
And the fact that it happens every time. If you want to leave us a review and support the show, I mean, we mentioned earlier supporting us on Patreon, but if you just want to support us in a quick way, it takes a couple seconds. Just if you have Apple Podcasts or iTunes, jump on and give us a review. It really helps the visibility of the podcast, helps us climb up those podcast charts so people can find the show and listen to more Star Wars content or their first Star Wars content. Something, Mike, I've heard recently. I've met a lot of people, friends of friends, or just other people that are just random, that just happen to find us and they don't really listen to Star Wars podcasts and they're listening to us. So that's exceptional.
Well, we got them first before they found a good one. Awesome. You can go to thecanoncantina.com for links to all of our social media. You can also listen to and watch the show there. Well, the show is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Podbean, Podcast Addict, YouTube, and on Spotify. And we're streaming live right now on Twitch. Thanks for those of you that stuck around for us for the live stream.
Yeah.
Before we wrap this up, Zach, do you have anything that you would like to plug?
Oh man, not particularly. I'll just say.
Where can we find you?
I run a company. That's right. I run a company called Team Covenant. You go to teamcovenant.com. And if you're into Star Wars and you don't play any tabletop games, you're missing out. There's a ton of really great Star Wars tabletop games. So just hit up the site. Yeah, you'll see on the homepage icons of different games you can click. We have everything from learning how to play, how to buy it, what you need to buy, and everything thereafter. So you can check us out there. And then personally, you can find me at Zach Bunn on Twitter and Instagram. And I post quite a bit about Star Wars. I post even more about Star Wars games. So if you're into those kind of things, follow me there or hit me up, and I'm happy to chat.
Yeah, Star Wars Top Gaming helped get me back into Star Wars back with around Celebration Anaheim when we all went. And as a customer of Team Covenant, I can say that like the service is great, and these learn to play videos for the different games are also very, very helpful. If you're hesitant about some of these things, you feel like it might be a big thing to jump into. Check out a lot of the video content they have over there. It definitely makes things much more accessible.
Yeah, I've sent many people, you guys just learn to play videos, especially the X-Wing stuff, just to give people a taste on what it is, because it seems very daunting when it's really not. And that's a positive on the game, not a negative on the game. And now the game is so big with all the new factions, and I continually wake up in a cold sweat thinking about playing the Republic or the Separatists, and I have to make myself go back to sleep and say got things to spend time and money on right now, but I will get there eventually, I'm pretty sure. But help spread the word of our show by subscribing, rating, and reviewing. Thank you for you guys that have done that. And if you think we do something better, or you want us to talk about something on the show in the future, email us at canoncantina@gmail.com. And something we didn't mention yet, but we've mentioned in the past, we have a TeePublic page now with shirts on it, and we keep forgetting to talk about it more on the show. It's pretty exciting for us. That is teepublic.com/user/the Canon Cantina. We'll put it in the show notes, and it's also, you can find it easily on our website and things like that. But basically, we have the logo shirt, which is also our logo on all sorts of various items now we've talked about. Like Mike still doesn't believe we have a notebook on there, but we have a notebook. And
I did see it the other day, actually.
You believe me now.
I do.
But we have a t-shirt, hoodies, and all that stuff. And also Mike made a fantastic design the other day that I've got to give credit, that I guess we're announcing on the show now for the first time. It's really only been live for a day, and that's a new shirt called the Jedi Legend. And that is a Luke Skywalker shirt. It doesn't say the Canon Cantina on it, but it has Luke on it, and his lightsaber is the Jedi Knight symbol, and I'm all about it. So if you guys, that sounds interesting to you, you can go on the site. You can choose the color of your shirt to customize it to the way you want. And
That's
TeePublic
right.
has been nothing but great with us. And also, I know some people that have bought shirts, Mike, from our TeePublic, and they've had some maybe issues with sizing or something didn't turn out the way they wanted, and they immediately emailed TeePublic, and TeePublic just sent them extra shirts, just no charge,
Nice.
different sizes and things like that. So they were just like, oh, that size is a little too tight for you or whatever. We'll just send you the next size up, no charge. It's
awesome.
really great. So if you guys want to support the show that way and wear some Canon Cantina stuff, it's pretty exciting, and we've got more of that when it comes to Celebration, and we hinted that the last show.
That's right. So we will be back with another episode next week. We are obviously struggling to get through this Children of the Jedi trilogy back to back to back. I will not apologize for that because it's a very difficult trilogy to get through, and it's more fun for us to talk to guests. But we will be back with a new episode of some next week. Thanks for joining us here in the Canon Cantina, everybody. Cheers.
May the Force be with you.